Hey guys, thanks for checking out my channel. My name's Don, and today I'm going to talk about what I consider to be uh, some of the most ridiculous fishing myths out there. Um, Bass fishermen are incredible people. Uh, they tend to be very gullible, and I can speak from experience. I'm probably one of the most gullible that you'll come across. Uh, all you have to do is look at the tackle that I own because, if you post a video or you get on there and you talk about some lure and some special qualities it has and the attributes that make it irresistible to fish, I'm one of the first guys that gets in line to buy it. So I understand. We're a little gullible, but there are a lot of myths out there that I've realized over the years that they are just that. They're not true. Uh, People will continue to believe them regardless of what I think, but I just want to touch on a few of them. The first one is that bass will only hit in the morning or in the evening. That's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, if you go out there and you fish all day, you're going to catch bass all day. Different times of the year, certain things take place. For example, in the winter, uh, waters tend to be much colder. As a result, fish aren't as active first thing in the morning, but as that water begins to warm up, they get much more active. So wintertime, typically your best time to fish is probably 10 to 2, warmest time of the day. But for the most part, you know, believe it or not, it's fishing early and fishing late is not necessarily the only times that you can catch bass. A lot of people believe it's due to the low light conditions. Might have some influence on a bass striking, but the reality is they feed all day long. I guess myth number two, you need expensive equipment to catch bass. Uh, I want to say that I've never believed this, but I've certainly got hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in fishing tackle, and of course that includes my boat. But when you look at the amount of money that most bass fishermen have invested in the sport, you'd have a hard time making the argument that you don't have to have expensive equipment to fish. The truth is, one rod, one reel, half a dozen lures, some plastics. That's really all you need. I think back to when I started out, back in the 60s. Uh, we typically had one fishing rod, and it wasn't even graphite, it was fiberglass. And most of us used a spinning reel, usually a Mitchell 300 or a Shakespeare. We didn't have the assortment of fishing lures that we have today, and we certainly didn't have the types of equipment that we have today. But we caught plenty of fish. There wasn't any shortage of fish back then, and it wasn't that fishing was easier or better, but it was simpler. And most of us, most of us did not need or want a lot of equipment. Nowadays, particularly for us older anglers, we've accumulated so much stuff over the years that half the time we can't even find what it is we're looking for. Another myth number three, bass stop biting after a cold front. Again, that's not true. The reason that anglers say that is because they get fewer bites. Uh, the reality is bass don't stop feeding, they stop chasing. There's a big difference in those two words. Feeding simply means that you know, when you say bass stop feeding, bass never really stop feeding. I mean, unless there's such a severe cold front that they've buried their head in the mud, they're always willing to eat. And a lot of it has to do with just their natural inclination to attack pretty much anything that moves. A bass is a predator, and they're a carnivore. They're looking for food all the time. That's the way nature designed them. Uh, but what truly happens after a cold front, the reason that you're getting fewer bites is that bass stay closer to the cover. They will spend far more time deep into the vegetation without moving. And if you want to catch them, you're going to have to put the bait literally right in their mouth. And that's hard for most of us to do. Typically if you fish, particularly along the shoreline, as most anglers do, what you end up doing is you make a cast about every 10 or 15 feet. So that period or space in between where you made your last cast and where you make your next cast, you're not working that area very thoroughly. And so, one of the great advantages that have come about in the last few years are power poles. The ability to go into a position, into a spot, and lock down on that spot and really fish it surgically. Put your bait every foot or two apart, because at that point, you're most likely to put the bait right in front of the fish's face. And when that happens, again, bass just don't have any control over it. They're going to strike. So the key after a front is to fish a little slower, fish an area more thoroughly, and you'll find that the cold front had very little impact. Myth number 4 goes to the idea of color and the importance of color. I've talked about this in the past many times. I made a video about it, but I don't believe color has a huge impact, and yet fishermen believe that it does. Most fishermen, if you ask them, as a matter of fact, I just got a call a little while ago from a fellow that was on his way up to Lake Wales because he's looking for a certain color plastic worm. Doesn't matter how many times I make the argument, people will always believe that color makes a difference. And usually it's the same old story. I was out the other day and couldn't get a bite, and all of a sudden I put on a blueberry jelly worm, and man, I just started catching them one right after another. Well, the thing that you don't know is if you'd have continued using the same worm that you were using before in the same exact area with the same exact cast, you probably would have caught the same fish. And of course, we'll never know. We can't prove that one way or another. But the reality is the fish really doesn't care what color the lure is. There may be a few times because of the light refraction, because of the color of the water, because of the time of the year, there may be a few times that it does influence a strike, but I would go as far as to say 99% of the time it doesn't matter. I've often quoted Buck Perry, the father of structure fishing. I've often quoted him because in his book, in his advanced fishing seminars, he stressed the fact that color just doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference to the fishermen anyway. And again, we would put on seminars. People would go to these seminars. They'd always ask the same question: Buck, if color doesn't make a difference, why do you make your lures, spoon plugs, in different colors? And he always replied the same way. The fish doesn't care about the color. Fishermen care. And that's why I make them in different colors. So some of these ideas that you might have about clear water using natural colors, dark water using dark colors or light colors, cloudy water, in the wind, out of the wind, in low light. All of those things may sound like they make a difference, but they really don't. Stick with the color you're most comfortable with, and I guarantee you'll catch fish. But here's a side note. Manufacturers, they want you to believe that color makes a huge difference. If you've ever gone into a tackle shop, and I'm sure you have, you will be amazed at the number of different colors there are. And truthfully, there's only a certain amount of colors in the color spectrum. But manufacturers have found a way to actually create and name new colors. Colors like sunrise and jalapeno and God, I can't even think, blueberry, and some of the other colors that you've heard pop up and some that have become very popular. They don't exist. They're just colors that the manufacturer came up with to sell more plastic worms. Back years ago, I had a tackle shop, and it always amazed me because I'm a big believer in worm fishing, and because I know fishermen, I used to stock a lot of different plastic worms, and there's a lot of different colors, a lot of shapes, sizes, but most importantly, the color selection is what fishermen are most anxious to see. And it used to amaze me. People would come into the store and they spend an hour looking, going up and down the aisles, back and forth. And finally, I'd see them come to the front and kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, couldn't find what I was looking for. And I asked them, what exactly were you looking for? Well, my buddy was using this purple plastic worm with a yellow tail. And the tail was a curly tail, not a flat tail. And you don't have any, so I'm going to go to another tackle shop and look. And it used to just blow my mind that all these plastics I have in the store, and this particular fisherman doesn't believe any of them will catch fish, not based on their size, rather based on their color. So anyway, that's just to put an end to that myth. Color really doesn't make a difference. So another myth that I hear often is kind of ties in the same way, and that is that if you want to catch big bass, you have to use big baits. Again, I don't think there's a lot of truth in that. I've caught big bass on small baits, I've caught big bass on medium baits, and I've caught big bass on large baits. A bass is a bass is a bass. They don't care. If they see a bait and they think that particular bait, whatever in their minds, whatever it might mimic, to them it's simply a food source. And if they believe they can get it in their mouth, and even if it's questionable, they're going to try. And if it's large, they're still going to try to eat it if they can. People don't realize that most bass, large bass, get that way by eating a wide variety of food. Everything from crustaceans to dragonflies to any type of insect that they might pick up off the surface, to frogs, even turtles, snakes, and as they get bigger, this is all beyond fish. But as they get bigger, they might even eat a bird or a duckling, because again, it all depends on their size and the literally the size of the food they're going after. But just because they're a big bass doesn't mean they won't eat a grasshopper or a bumblebee that happens to fall in the water. They will, and I've seen them do it. So, anytime someone says, well, if you really want to catch, big bass, you've got to go to these 10 and 12 inch, glide baits and big spoons. Yeah, you'll catch big bass on those. but you'll catch smaller bass on them too. I mean, I've been out, particularly on a couple of the lakes where in steep water, and I've thrown out these big 10-inch spoons and caught a 2.5 pound bass. So, a little surprising, but at the same time, I've gone out with my fly rod, which I love fly fishing, and I've had a size 12 popper, and I've caught 4 and 5 pound bass. I've hooked some fish that were even bigger than that, and they simply broke my leader. But I know that the inclination is there, to use big baits, thinking you're going to catch big fish. But the truth is, if you just go fishing and you use whatever bait you want to use, you stand just as good a chance of catching a big bass as if you go out and spend all day throwing the biggest baits in your tackle box. The next myth I want to talk about is smell or odor. I've heard this one for a long time, and years and years ago, I spent most of my time, like a lot of fishermen, I smoked, and I was always a little bit concerned about whether the nicotine on my fingers, when I touched the lure, whether that had any impact, on a fish's ability to somehow pick that scent up in the water and not strike as a result of it. I've heard people say too that using different types of insect spray off and other things to get rid of the mosquitoes, that too has an impact on the bass, and that they shouldn't do it. And of course, the manufacturers have jumped on this, and they've created a number of different odors, smells that they say are fish attractors that will help you catch more fish. Again, it's questionable whether there's any truth in that. Berkeley has done some tremendous studies on it and seem to have proven that it does make a difference. But I got to tell you a quick little story. And again, it goes back to my mentor, Buck Perry, and a little experiment he did back in the 50s. He took a bunch of sports writers out, and they went to a lake in Chicago or somewhere in that neighborhood. And the idea behind it was to prove, first, that there were fish in this lake, and secondly, that smell or odors had no impact on the fish and your ability to catch them. So the first thing he did on day one was to go out, and he just caught a boatload of fish. He caught them trolling, he caught them casting, but he caught them all over the lake, and it just shocked everyone. He took 4 or 5 guys out with him on different trips, and it didn't matter if it was morning, afternoon, or evening. He caught fish, and he caught them steadily. So the next day, he was going to take people out, and he was going to prove to them that any odor or smell to the lure had no effect. And in order to prove that, he took a bunch of his spoon plugs and some of his jigs. He put them in a bucket, and he dumped gasoline in the bucket. He soaked the lures for a few minutes, and then he tied them on his line, and he started fishing. And guess what? He still caught tons of fish. The fish didn't care. It didn't make one bit of difference to the fish. The fact that they had a gasoline smell to them, his human scent, whatever it might be, no difference whatsoever. And again, I think it's because a fish doesn't take the time to smell out their prey. It's not quite like a predator on land who might follow a scent for a distance and then eventually catch its prey. A bass strikes out of instinct. He sees or hears the object that he believes is food, and he attacks. For the most part, if he were to go up and sniff it, it'd be as ridiculous as if he goes up and just stares at it and says, Yeah, I was kind of looking for a grape-colored worm, and he swims away. It's just not going to happen, folks. So, again, to me, that's an easy myth to dispel. But one of the last myths I want to talk about are hooks. The hooks that we use to fish with. These hooks are laser sharp, and I got to tell you, I have had more than my share in my fingers, in my arms, in my leg, a couple in my back of my head. Uh, they're razor sharp. Unlike the past, back in the 60s and 70s, we carried a file with us, and it wasn't unusual to stop fishing long enough to kind of file down the hooks because they'd lost their edge. But today's hooks are like a razor blade. And unfortunately, when they go in and they hook a fish, the seesawing back and forth actually works just like a razor blade does. And it's one of the reasons we lose a lot of the fish because if you take, just for a few seconds, if you take the pressure off that fish, the hook falls out because by sliding back and forth during the fight, during the time you're trying to land the fish, that hook has done such a nice job of cutting whatever area that it was in that now, you know, it just falls out. The little barb makes no difference whatsoever. So the idea that you have to sharpen your hooks doesn't exist anymore. That's an old myth that existed in the 60s and 70s and even earlier than that. But in today's world, there's just no need to sharpen your hooks. They are they are as sharp as they will ever be, and uh, my wife's motioning outside that it's pouring down rain. Uh, but the hooks are sharp, so folks, you don't have to worry about sharpening them. Uh, so my last comment will be on uh, where do the fish live? The fish live in the shallow water? Do they live in the deep water? There's a lot of controversy over this. There's a lot of people that believe that, particularly here in South Florida, that fish live in the shallow water year round. And there's probably some truth in that. Again, if you refer to Buck Perry and his beliefs and the things that he proved to be true, the home of the fish is deep water. And, we're now starting to see a lot of truth in that because as the technology has changed dramatically and we now have modern day electronics that allow us to kind of track fish, uh, all the different things that are available to fishermen actually almost make it unfair for many anglers in the tournaments that may or may not have this equipment, but they can actually spot fish in 30 feet of water, 40 feet of water, and they can drop a lure to them and watch that lure in action and watch the fish go after it. So where in the past, fish had a little bit of a refuge from fishermen by going into the deeper water, it's not necessarily the case anymore. But the home of the fish is deep water, and don't ever believe that there's any reason for fish to live in the shallow water. They move from the deep water to the shallow water to feed and to mate. That's it. That's the only reason. It's not that it's more comfortable. It's not that it has a better water clarity or a better water temperature. It's simply to eat or to mate. Now, when you take lakes like we have here in Florida, South Florida, Lake Okeechobee, Lake Istapoca, Kissimmee, uh, and some of the others, these are very shallow lakes, and so there isn't a lot of deep water for them to go to. And people ask me all the time, what is the definition of deep water? Typically, deep water would be anything over 12 or 14 feet. And if you don't have that available, which we don't in Istapoca, or Okeechobee, then the next best alternative for the bass is heavy cover. So in the absence of deep water, fish will live in the vegetation. They will live in the shallow water. Now, they may still go out and look for deeper water, and they may find it in some lakes, but in many of the lakes that I fish, what I found is that they may move out for a short period of time into 6, 7, 8 foot of water, but they'll spend the majority of their time in shallow water. So that's it, folks. That's the end of the myths that I want to talk about today. There are more myths out there that I can address at another time, but just want to touch on a few things today that would give you some reason to think. And you may disagree. That's fine. I don't claim to be an expert. If anything, I'm more of a student than I am an expert. I learn every day. I try to educate myself. I learn from other fishermen. I learn from the books that I read and the videos that I watch. But most importantly, I learn on the water. And that's where we all get our education. So if you would, you know, hit the little button on the bottom, the like button, and subscribe to my channel. And please leave some remarks. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. Thanks again, and I look forward to my next video.